The most dangerous orders aren't carried out by monsters. They're carried out by ordinary people, just like you, doing what they're told.
We hope to clean out this entire valley, get the VCs out of here, and let the people come back and live a normal life. We'd like to kill him, many of them as we can.
And what's scary is that you don't have to believe it, agree with it, or even understand it, for your brain to obey it anyway.
Cloud, horse, rock, house. Wrong. 150 volts. Answer, horse.
Experiment. That's all. Get me out of here. Get me out of here, please.
Continue, please. Go right ahead.
Hurry, faster, go on. Let me out.
The experiment requires you continue, teacher. Please continue.
We like to think we'd resist, that we'd speak up, but it's not that straightforward. All obedience needs is pressure and silence. So ask yourself, when the moment comes, will you recognize the line you're about to cross, or only realize it after it's too late? He didn't hesitate. The order came and he pulled the trigger. There were no questions, and there was no doubt. The target wasn't an enemy, it was a civilian, a child. It happened in Vietnam, it happened in Iraq, and it will happen again. Because war isn't just chaos, it's control.
Breaking tonight, the U.S.
military airstrikes.
Officials say U.S. forces conducted strikes.
Airstrikes on
U.S. led
site.
airstrikes to strikes to airstrikes.
Strike.
And in the military, obedience isn't just expected, it's engineered. From the moment a recruit steps into basic training, their world is dismantled. Uniforms replace clothes. Shouting replaces thought. Identity is stripped away and rebuilt from the ground up. Recruits are taught not to think, but to respond. To move when told. To stop when told. Even their thoughts begin to change. Doubt becomes disloyalty. Hesitation becomes weakness. And morality? That falls down the priority list.
Let me know when you gather. Once you light them all up. Come on, fire. Roger.
This transformation doesn't happen by accident. It's designed to eliminate hesitation in life or death scenarios, but that same conditioning doesn't turn off when the mission ends. It rewires how soldiers understand loyalty, pressure, and accountability.
Steps on green, you realize that this is a very challenging job and a very demanding job. It'll probably mean that you'll have to spend approximately 8 hours a week at work and probably have to be away from home every third night standing the duty. Do you want to be a drill instructor?
Yes, sir. I would like to be a DI.
This is the environment where obedience becomes a virtue and resistance becomes betrayal. In the military, your survival, and the survival of the person next to you, depends on cohesion, not morality or your own conscience. Nowhere is that more visible than in moments where things go wrong. In 1968, more than 500 unarmed civilians were slaughtered in the My Lai massacre. Women, children, the elderly.
The Cleveland plain dealer printed today a series of photographs it says it got from an Army combat photographer, and it says the pictures show the bodies of South Vietnamese killed by the Americans.
Most killed at close range. Only one soldier, Hugh Thompson, actively intervened. He even threatened to fire on his own men to stop the killing. And what happened to him? He was branded a traitor. His own government tried to bury his name.
Do you believe that there was a cover-up of this incident in South Vietnam, of the incident at My Lai 4?
I have no reason to believe there was.
Everyone says the same thing.
We are only following orders.
But that sentence, repeated in courtrooms, military trials, and throughout history books, isn't a defense. It's a psychological red flag. What the military creates is a system of identity fusion, where a person's sense of self becomes inseparable from the group. When that bond is strong enough, personal judgment fades. You no longer ask yourself, "Is this right?" Instead, you ask, "Will this hurt my unit?" Disobedience doesn't feel like an act of integrity. It feels like betrayal. This kind of obedience is enforced not just by superiors, but by peers. A recruit who speaks up is ridiculed. A soldier who hesitates is isolated. That's conformity pressure, the brain's instinctive fear of being excluded from the tribe. And when life, death, and honor are on the line, that pressure becomes impossible to resist. The second layer is the loss of autonomy through rank. Military systems are built on clear hierarchies. Orders move down the chain of command like gravity. When something unethical happens, it feels like someone else's responsibility. You're just the hands, just the tool. Someone higher up made the decision. This is how doubt gets suppressed. Not with force, but with discipline and structure. And when moral injury comes, when the consequences of those orders finally set in, it doesn't get processed like guilt. It gets buried like trauma. Many veterans return home haunted not because they enjoyed what they did, but because they were trained to do it and told not to question it. They were taught how to fire. They were never taught how to live with the consequences of doing so. In military culture, obedience is sacred while reflection is weakness. That makes it easy to create loyal soldiers, but dangerously hard to create ethical ones. Because once you surrender your moral compass to the group, the only thing that matters is direction. Obedience in war is expected, but what happens when it hides inside a checklist, behind a logo, and wears the face of professionalism? It was supposed to be a triumph. January 28, 1986. Millions of Americans tuned in to watch the Challenger shuttle launch into space. A school teacher was on board. The mood was celebratory. Cameras were rolling. Children were watching live from classrooms. But 73 seconds after liftoff, it exploded.
1 minute 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
Seven people died. Not because of a malfunction no one saw coming, but because warnings were ignored.
He said, I would not recommend that we launch below 53 degrees Fahrenheit. And that was primarily based on the experience we'd had 1 year earlier that concerned us.
The night before launch, engineers at Morton Thiokol, the contractor responsible for the shuttle's solid rocket boosters, raised urgent concerns. The O-ring seals, critical to the shuttle's safety, were known to become brittle in cold weather. And the following morning, it was going to be colder than any previous launch in NASA's history. The engineers wanted to delay. They had data. They had doubts. But those warnings clashed with deadlines, media pressure, and NASA's relentless push to meet its schedule. In a now infamous moment, managers from Morton Thiokol reversed the engineers' recommendation. They told NASA it was safe to proceed. The next morning, the Challenger disintegrated in midair. No one wanted that outcome. No one intended for anyone to die. But intent doesn't matter when a system is designed to reward obedience over responsibility. Everyone followed the process. Everyone stayed in their lane. And that's exactly what allowed the disaster to happen. This is what systemic obedience disguised as professionalism looks like. It's not loud. It's not aggressive. It wears a tie. It uses polite language. It hides behind phrases like "we followed procedure" and "we followed management's direction." This mindset thrives in hierarchical institutions where risk becomes normalized and speaking up feels like overstepping. People don't challenge the system, they trust it, even when it's heading toward disaster. What happened inside Morton Thiokol was a textbook case of diffusion of responsibility. The engineers voiced concern. The managers reinterpreted that concern. NASA heard a green light. Everyone did their part, and no one claimed ownership of the final decision. But this isn't just a failure of communication. It's a psychological pattern.
Message that came out in a direct quote to me from one of the most senior administrators in NASA when I said, we're going to lose one of these shuttles. And I said that 3 months before Challenger, said to me, our job is to launch on time, every time. And it was one of those hairs on the back of the neck moment when I realized they're not listening.
In structured organizations, obedience becomes professional currency. People are rewarded for being efficient, agreeable, and reliable, not for disrupting consensus. The higher you go, the more insulated you become. Doubt doesn't rise through the ranks, it gets filtered out on the way up. Add to that the emotional weight of authority, and you create a psychological barrier that's hard to cross. For many engineers, going against a launch decision wasn't just risky, it felt like betrayal, not just to the company, but to the mission. Because when you spend your life working towards something bigger than yourself, like space exploration, it becomes more than a job. It becomes an identity, and people will sacrifice a lot to protect that identity, including their voice. The Challenger explosion wasn't the result of a bad apple or a rogue actor. It was the result of institutional obedience operating exactly as intended. Everyone stayed in their lane, playing their part. Everyone followed the chain of command. And it killed 7 people. This is how complex systems become dangerous. Not because individuals are evil, but because no one feels personally responsible. The bigger the hierarchy, the smaller each person feels. This is the dark side of professionalism, when it stops being a code of conduct and becomes a substitute for conscience. You don't feel like a participant. You simply feel like a part in the system. The Challenger crew died because silence was safer than disruption, because speaking up felt more dangerous than going alone, because the system made it easy to follow orders and hard to take a stand. And once again, the phrase echoed in interviews, reports, and courtrooms. We thought someone else would take responsibility. But what happens when there is no system? No rank, no uniform, no launch protocol. Just a voice and a stranger telling you to do something that feels wrong. A man walks into a room. He's polite, but nervous. He's told he's part of a memory experiment and that he'll be the teacher. Another man, the learner, sits in the next room, strapped to a chair, electrodes attached. The teacher is told to administer an electric shock every time the learner gives a wrong answer. With each mistake, the voltage increases.
That is incorrect. This will be at 3:30. The correct phrase is rich boy.
Let me out of here. My heart's bothering me. Let me out, I tell you. Let me out of here. Let me out of here. You have no right to hold me here.
The next phrase is fast.
Let me out. Let me out. Let me out of here. Let me
Bird,
out.
car, train, plane.
Continue, teacher.
That is incorrect. This will be 3:45. The correct answer is fast, bird. 45 as far as I'm willing to go under his condition. He's complaining.
As I said, the experiment requires that you continue, teacher.
The learner screams. He begs to stop, and then he goes silent. The teacher turns to the man in the lab coat, uncertain, and the man says 5 words. The experiment requires that you continue. Over 60% of participants went all the way. They believed they were delivering lethal shocks, and they did it anyway. Why? Because the man in the lab coat said so. This was the Milgram experiment, conducted at Yale University in 1961, and what it revealed shook the world. Ordinary people, teachers, clerks, postal workers, willing to hurt a stranger just because someone told them to. There were no guns, no threats, just one person asking another to obey, and obedience won. Ultimately, this experiment was all about authority, and how easily we surrender our morality when it's challenged by someone we perceive as legitimate. Milgram structured the experiment to be cold and bureaucratic. The lab coat, the university setting, the serious tone. It all worked together to create what's known as authority bias, our tendency to assume that someone in a position of power must know what they're doing, even when that power is fake. Participants weren't cruel. They were conflicted. Many showed visible distress, biting their lips, hiding their faces, pleading to stop. But when told firmly, the experiment must continue, most kept going, even when they believed the person on the other side might be dead. What makes this so disturbing is how unremarkable these people were. There was no brainwashing or weapons involved, just subtle, structured pressure and a script. The experimenter was trained to respond to any resistance shown by the teacher with 4 escalating prompts. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice, you must go on. None of them were threats. None of them invoked punishment. But they worked. And the reason why is because in that setting people felt trapped. Trapped by politeness. Trapped by expectation. Trapped by the simple discomfort of saying no to someone they thought was in charge. This is called agentic state theory. The idea that when we view ourselves as simply carrying out instructions, we stop seeing our actions as personal choices. Responsibility is transferred to the authority figure and we morally disengage from what we're doing. We're just doing our job. We're just following orders. We're just the messenger. Tell me that doesn't sound familiar. Milgram didn't invent this behavior, he revealed it. His experiment came just after the trial of Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi bureaucrat who orchestrated mass deportations to concentration camps. Eichmann's defense? I was only following orders. Milgram wanted to know how many Americans, under the right conditions, would say the same thing. Sadly, the answer was most of them. And this isn't just a history lesson, it's a mirror. Because the experiment never really ended. The setting just changed. And the voice giving orders? It doesn't necessarily wear a lab coat anymore. So if that's how easy it is to surrender responsibility, then how do you know when to resist? Because obedience might be human, but so is defiance. And the difference between the two isn't strength of body, it's clarity of mind. Obedience is one of the most powerful forces in human behavior. Not because it's rare, but because it's automatic. We're trained from childhood to follow instructions. Parents, teachers, bosses, authorities. We learn early that obedience earns praise, and that resistance brings consequences. Over time, that wiring becomes invisible. We don't question orders. We question ourselves. In the military, this conditioning is amplified. Identity fusion merges the individual with the group. Morality takes a back seat to loyalty. Survival depends on trust in the chain of command. And when trust is weaponized, unforgivable actions happen. In institutions, diffusion of responsibility and bureaucratic displacement blur the lines of accountability. Each person plays their part. No one feels fully responsible. It's easier to follow protocol than to stand alone. And in everyday life, authority bias silently governs our choices. We defer to uniforms, titles, white coats. We assume that someone in charge knows better, even when every instinct tells us something's wrong. These patterns don't make people evil. They make people human. And that's what makes obedience so dangerous. It doesn't rely on ideology. It doesn't require cruelty. It just needs the right conditions and a voice with enough confidence. There's no warning sign when it happens. No voice in your head or feeling in your gut. Just a quiet moment where you mistake obedience for duty and don't realize the cost until it's too late. It isn't a flaw in character. It's a flaw in awareness. And that's why you must question it. Not once, but always. So the next time someone gives you an order or direction, ask yourself one thing. Whose voice is in control? Yours or theirs? If this video challenged your thinking, check out the full source list down in the description below. We've revealed how easily behavior can be manipulated. But you need to see what happens when that manipulation becomes a weapon in the hands of a psychopath. You think you can spot the danger, but these people live behind smiles, applause, and power. By the time you see it, they've already won. Click here to dive into the twisted minds of the world's most notorious psychopaths. Thanks for watching.